but I wanted to just take a moment today. We are very, very lucky to have Richard Waring with us. And I will say that Galapagos is a place I might not ever get to, and I've always wanted to, Richard. So this might be my way, but it might entice us to immediately sign right up. But um, Richard, as the son of a biologist mother and an Eagle Scout father, Richard is a poet and a naturalist who worked for the New England Journal of Medicine for over 35 years. If he hadn't grown up Episcopalian, he might have become a UU minister. There's the story. Charles Darwin has fascinated him for a long time, so going to the Galapagos was a lifelong dream that Rayanne Mason made possible. Stefan and Ariane Frank were also on the trip, and in researching Darwin, Richard discovered that his father's name was it Richard Darwin Waring or Richard Waring Darwin? Richard, you'll have to
Robert Waring Darwin.
Oh, Robert Waring Darwin.
Mhm.
And Richard's going to show us his photo album presentation of visiting first a rainforest village, Shandia, and then the special animals of the Galapagos Islands. So take it away, Richard. Thank you.
Okay. As Kathy mentioned, this was a trip that was organized by Rayanne Mason, our youth advisor, and normally she would organize trips for youth groups, but this time it was the chaperones of youth groups and the ministers of churches who got to go on this trip without the youth. And unfortunately, Rayanne said that it was harder to organize the grown-ups than ever the youth group because we have agency, we wander off, that sort of thing. So it was a new challenge for her. We also were accompanied, as Kathy mentioned, by Rayanne and by Ariane and Stefan Frank, two ministers, Eric Wefald and Joe Zaro, our good friend and my roommate, David Webster, our first church member, Vicky Almafatani, and Wilson Lowry and his son, and from down the street at the synagogue, Janet Lanza and her husband, Peter. So let me see if I can. No, I can't. So I will begin by sharing my screen and showing you the general orientation for where we were, and we were not even as far south as we were even further south than Central America. This is Ecuador here, and its capital, Quito, and 600 miles away, another plane flight, the Galapagos Islands, which are actually in the hundreds, but there are 7 or so that are the main islands, and we went to a couple of them. Here we have a close-up of Ecuador. You can see tagged and Shandian. Right in the midst of the rainforest up in the mountains. I thought that Quito was bad enough that I had trouble breathing because it's the second highest major airport in the world, second only to one that's in another South American country. But Shandia, with a lot of up and down, traveling many miles and hours, Shandia is actually a lower mountainous region. But I did learn from our church member and the husband of Andrea Presswich, another astronomer, Steve Sars, I asked him, where in the world is the closest point on the Earth to outer space? And you might think the Himalayas. Well, it's actually a mountain in Ecuador because the Earth is not a complete, not a genuine globe. It's kind of elliptical. And so around the equator, it juts out into space. And then within that, um, this mountain, which is in Ecuador, which is should be a very hot climate, you can see that it's covered with snow. And the mountain is called Chimborazo, and it's the closest point on Earth to outer space. So we arrived in Shandia, and this is the lunch area where we stayed. You can see Stefan there and Ariane, Rayanne, and Reverend Eric. And it is a rainy place. Um, just outside of our uh, rest area, these are the seeds of chocolate. Chocolate was discovered 5,000 years ago in Ecuador. So we had the delight of cutting these fruits in half out the seeds. In the fruit fresh around the plants. And then here's roasting the seeds. And this fire is, there's a kind of symbolic nature to it. There are three stones that prop up the frying pan. There's the mother stone, the father stone, and the child stone. And you began to smell the aroma of these chocolate beans. And then you take them and there's a kind of shell, almost like the shell of a chrysalis that you remove. And then you've got this grinder. You put the beans in here and you grind them. I believe that's my hand. I recognize the veins. And then you add sugar. You can also add milk powder to make milk chocolate. And then you grind it a second time, even finer. There's Rayanne. And then you can whisk it, and then you put out all sorts of goodies to dip in the chocolate that we got just from the backyard. So, talk about from farm to table. This was exquisite, and we loved it. A typical meal involved fish, and this is yucca, the root of the plant, some radish-like and a bit of fruit. So we were well taken care of. And it was a standard of eating that was actually exceeded that of the villagers that we stayed with in Shandia. It's a rainforest village of 350 people. They speak an indigenous language, Quechua, as well as the language of the colonists, Spanish. And they're two very different entities. So they are perpetually bilingual from the get-go. I was amazed by the number of exotic looking butterflies, uh, just incredible. Um, this one in particular, the morpho butterfly, which is used in a lot of jewelry. It's absolutely amazing. It is very um, hard to photograph, so I actually had to borrow this from the internet. Uh, but you're surrounded by green, and suddenly there's this blue flash. And every time I saw one, it was an inhalation of breath and an exquisite reaction. That's the outside of the morpho butterfly. So it has a way to flash its presence and also uh, hide itself in the bark of trees. I did enable myself of some free spa ingredients. This is clay that was brought up from this part of the rainforest, and my facial skin was never as soft as it was after that application. Before we move on to the Galapagos, I have two short films I want to share. So I'm going to start this, and what you'll see is a 360-degree. Ah, good.
Is there sound that we're not hearing?
It's just the falling of particles and a kind of cricket-like sound.
We don't hear any sound.
Okay. So that gives you a little taste of how the rainforest just surrounds you. The next short video is of villagers in Shandia. And you'll see they're just really basic dwellings, dirt floors, very little on the wall. And they just poured their heart out to us and fed us as best they could. Do you see
Yes.
all the people now? Good. So again, just a little taste of the spirit of the people, doing so much to improve their lives. And now on to the Galapagos, which was another plane ride. And I'll mostly be talking about things having to do with this leg and foot shaped island, the largest, Isabella. When we landed, we were suddenly surrounded by these famous creatures that we've read so much about. And this sea lion pup was nursing from its mother right on the dock. In fact, they were just underfoot. And we were just plunged into this environment. Oh, a little coda to the rainforest before I get further into the Galapagos. Robin wall himmerer who I just absolutely love, writes of visiting the Amazon rainforest, and this is what she says. The interior of the rainforest is overwhelming in its complexity. There is not a bare surface anywhere. Branches are hung with curtains of mosses, and sprays of orchids dangle among them. Tree trunks are filmed over with algae, studded by giant ferns, and wound about with vines. Ants travel in convoys across the ground and up the trees, and metallic beetles glint in sun specks on the forest floor. The forest itself is richly textured, stems embossed with every manner of protuberance, leaves ornamented by spines and pleats, scales and fringes. Long shafts of sunlight cut through the dark canopy and catch the flash of iridescent butterfly wings before diffusing in the vegetation below. And I didn't share it, but I do have a clip of leaf cutting ants in a caravan bringing bits of leaf in a trail back to their homestead. Here is another wonderful, renowned creature. Oh, this is also the sea lions. I thought of this as kind of like a Valentine card. It just we're so peaceful. We were told to keep our distance, but they didn't seem to mind us, and they seem to be quite familiar with human interaction. I mean, just everywhere, you know? And here is a pelican, um, and they were very omnipresent as well. It reminded me of an Ogden Nash poem. A wonderful bird is the pelican. His bill can hold more than his belly can. He can hold in his beak enough for a week, but I'm damned if I see how the hell he can. There was a place called Flamingo Lagoon, and sure enough, I don't know if they named it after the flamingos oriented themselves to it, or if that was a welcome sign that you can go here. But I wasn't aware of flamingos outside of Florida, but here they were, all in this one specific area, and it was absolutely magical to see them. And now we get into my raison d'etre and reason for going there, my beloved blue-footed boobies. Now, notice the one on the left, I mean, on the right, you can't even see the feet, but the feet are reflecting onto the white belly. And then this is actually, I made a joke of this, like, I got a great shot. I actually took this picture of a picture in the Charles Darwin Museum, but it shows you in detail and how extremely blue they are. There are also red-footed boobies, but I didn't see any of those. This particular individual, which I'm not sure if it's male or female because they take turns, they protect their eggs not because they're incubating them, but to keep them away from things like snakes and lizards. And it was on top of the eggs, and I stood my ground because I wanted to take a picture of the eggs. And finally, after everyone in my group left to other parts of the trail, uh, the bird said, all right, I'll get up. I'll show you the eggs. Now scram. So I was happy I waited it out. I did write a poem called Blue-Footed Booby. Nothing prepares for the blueness of the booby, its outlandish stance. Bright flocks bombard a school of fish. Their anatomy is agile. Permanently closed nostrils allow them to eat well while underwater. The male puts on a comic dance for his blue-footed mate, up on one foot, then the other, clownishly. On bare Galapagos rocks, his blue shimmer reflects off his soft white belly. If the blue satisfies her, she rewards him with 2 white eggs. They both guard under the equatorial sun and the watchful stare of stars. And we were treated on the dock where you saw the sea lions to this amazing display. They, in concert, dive into the water when they see from above a school of fish, and thereby, by grouping themselves, the fish have no way out, and they have a group meal together. So that was pretty stunning. There is also, and I didn't know this either, the world's 3rd smallest penguin, and it's the most northerly of all penguins. There are a tremendous amount of cacti that grow to great heights, and birds find safe territory there by surrounding themselves with these needles and prickers. And being the Ecuador, something that can conserve water over time during dry spells, it's the right kind of plant to be there. Here's some of our group, David, and you can see Vicky and Ariane and Rayanne and Eric. And behind them, very tall cactuses. We would go to various places where we knew significant wildlife would be in these boats, and it was always a different adventure each day. Rayanne successfully scuba diving, or snorkeling rather. And I went into the water and then realized that I had my cell phone in my pocket, and I was concerned that I would had destroyed it, and it got carried back in someone's palm to the boat. Whereupon later I found, being an iPhone, it was just fine. But I didn't want to test my luck. I was grateful that Apple had created such a thing. I learned at the Charles Darwin Museum that this is a sphinx moth or hawk moth, and it was unfortunately deceased, which enabled me to take a close-up picture of it on the beach. And this is sunset on Isabella Island. Another creature that I was very interested to encounter in the wild, because I had grown up not with fuzzy creatures like hamsters or what's the other one? Anyway,
Gerbils?
yes, hamsters and gerbils. I grew up, my pet was an iguana with the amazing name that I came up with, Iggy. Well, the Galapagos have 4 iguanas.
Whoa.
This is another borrowed picture from the museum, but it really shows you how hungry this creature is to want to eat something so prickly. This particular iguana was named by our naturalist guide, and when he called his name, he came out of the bushes and began eating leaves. And so this gave us an opportunity to, get close to it, and the scales are just really impressive. Like, this looks like uh, the chain metal armor of a knight. It's just unbelievable. Along the way to this particular iguana, which is a yellow land iguana, we encountered 2 iguanas that you would think from this still picture were best friends, but they were actually fighting one another, and they were lifting their head up and down, with sort of threatening nods. I tried to capture that, but of course, this picture makes it look like they're kissing cousins. This is a marine iguana, and the distinction that they have is that they favor diving into the water and eating the vegetation on rocks at the ocean floor. And then they have the difficulty of riding waves to get themselves back onto the islands where there's sometimes sheer cliffs. Another aspect, because they're dining on so much salty material, their kidneys cannot keep up with excreting all the salt, and so they have a habit of snorting through their nostrils excess salt from their bodies. It's similar to what seagulls do. Seagulls also have a very salty diet, and they have to excrete through their eyes. You might hear them crying. They're not really crying, but they're excreting excess salt from their diet. This is one of the 4, and I wasn't able to see it in person, so this is another borrowed photo from the Charles Darwin Museum. And this particular iguana has translucent scales, so you're actually looking into the skin of the creature. And they are the rarest of the 4, and they are on an island, the slopes of the Wolf volcano, uh, which is only available to scientists. You might think this is ET, but it's actually a giant tortoise, and it's in a nursery where the tortoises are nurtured and developed, and then they get really, really big. And there are different kinds. One kind has a shell that is uniform all the way around, but on another island, they're called saddleback uh, giant tortoises, because for their head to reach higher, where the vegetation is higher off the ground, over time, the front where the head is raised up and enabled them to survive on the higher vegetation. A species of tortoise that didn't survive is preserved in the form of Lonesome George. Here he is. He grew to a great old age, and they tried to mate him, but it was never successful. He was a male Pinta Island tortoise, the last known of his kind, and was known as the rarest creature on Earth. And he died in 2012. So there is a special room devoted to him, and he's in a glass case. Um, you you try not to breathe too much around him so he can stay taxidermified. We also saw some great blue herons. Oh, I've got a poem about the Galapagos tortoise. A tortoise moves slow as a stone on legs, his carapace gathering lichen. He slips into water to dine in time-stopped action, hunger a dance among refugees from extinction. Some live more than a year on their backs in ships, no food, no water, waiting to be eaten. One born in Mozart's time died only recently. 8 strong men were needed to lift him from the ground. I watched a giant saddleback extend his neck so finches could feed on parasite. Mating is a difficult, awkward conjoining to behold. The female rises on her hind legs. The male lifts his shell over her. In this way, the vulnerable parts can give and receive. The Sally Lightfoot crabs were everywhere. So exciting to see. They really stand out on the black lava rocks. Interesting patterns. I don't think I'd want to have one crawling all over me, but they were fascinating to observe from a short distance. A red-headed lizard, and you can see the pock marks in the lava, worn down by time and wind, rain. Here's another specialty of the Galapagos, the frigate bird. And this is the male, which puffs itself up to attract females. And this one seems to have impressed a female enough to raise a family. That's the female. And again, I had to wait a little bit, but it revealed some chicks, white and fluffy. And here we are at another boat excursion where you can see in the midst of the water a kind of rocky barricade. So this became a nursery for the sea lions, and that was our main reason for this travel, to get close to some of the sea lions. And these two siblings were just so playful in the water, and they just slip and slide, and just like river otters were just so amazing to watch and enjoy their flights of fancy. However, um, when we were taking some pictures, Papa Sea Lion reared his head, and Rayanne had a little altercation because this fellow began approaching, and she's like, wow, he looks really, really close in my viewfinder. Oh my goodness, he's charging me. And she had to quickly, briskly come off the rocks that she was on. I think her towering figure may have spooked Papa Sea Lion. but she had a close encounter, a little too close for comfort. Here's a frigate bird that's bringing some nesting material home. Now, these next three are photographs that my friend Eric took. He had an underwater camera, and the rays. I didn't expect to see rays. I had been scuba diving in Cabo San Lucas on the Baja Peninsula and never encountered them. But as we were boating to this location, we saw these enormous manta rays surfacing, and that got us clued into the fact that we might see some. And while I was interacting with sea turtles in their own waters, a flight of 14 rays swam by underneath me, and I was absolutely mesmerized. And as much research as I'd done about the Galapagos, this was one creature I hadn't foreseen experiencing, and it was just such a thrill. And you can see in the background of the this snorkeler, one of the giant tortoises and a school of perhaps angelfish. Well, we did get hungry during our excursions and exercise in the water, and this is what lunch looked like on the boat. I'm sad to say that we're nearing the end of our journey. I have just a couple more images. Back on Isabella, we had some interesting nights dining out together, and as the island, originally the Galapagos were not owned by any country. Nobody seemed interested. They were deserted. There was no fresh water. And so finally, Ecuador, being the closest to it, even though it was 600 miles away, said, all right, we'll claim it. And then with the advent of ecotourism and the interest that Charles Darwin brought to the islands, there's now 3 generations of ecotourists and guides, and the island has learned how to manufacture fresh water, and there are all sorts of hotels and an airport for small plane landing and so forth. So we did dine out one night at a Japanese restaurant, and I just love the way Japanese presentation is for the eyes as well as the stomach. And then, of course, because of my fondness for iguanas and being thirsty, I just had to get some iguana IPA, and so I did. So I did indeed. So with that, I'd like to come back to our group and answer any questions that you might have.
Beautiful.
Now, is David, do you have any additional comments to make as one of the adventurers?
Oh, that was reliving it, Richard. That was great. And particularly appreciate the poetry. That brings it back to nights in the Galapagos and Shandia, and you coming up with poems and just the way you describe things. It was great. Thank you.
Since I didn't mention the medical preparations that we made to go there. We did get shots for yellow fever and typhoid. We had pills for, altitude sickness, and there's no vaccine for dengue, which is also mosquito borne. But we fortunately missed out on that. There was one potential problem that we almost encountered when we were taking down a dead tree in the rainforest. We've discovered a colony of bullet ants, and bullet ants, which are about the size of carpenter ants, they can administer a bite that's as painful as a bullet. And so we successfully stayed away from those. But I did get a lot of other smaller ant bites because one day I went into the rainforest, and I suggest you not do this. I was wearing shorts. Do not wear shorts in the rainforest. Other questions, Jean?
Richard, could you talk a little bit more about the activities that you did in the village, or sort of there was some sort of community service?
Yes, it was a learning service trip like what
So,
we have with our youth groups. We did a lot of manual labor. We were bringing um, potato sacks of sand from a riverbed up a very steep hill, 45-degree steep hill, to a place where they're going to have an educational center with a grove of cacao trees. And we also harvested stones from the river to put along either side of a trail leading up to that educational center that they're developing. And we worked in the village to landscape around buildings, and we organized a library with books um, so that they could advance their educational abilities, with some Spanish and English materials. And we also partook in a class to learn Quechua, which was very interesting. And one day I was surrounded by soccer playing youth, and they wanted me, talk English, please. And so the best I could do was I started reciting the Lord's Prayer. And I was hoping that God or, some things would kind of translate for them. So that pleased them. One kid, they seem so distant from our culture, and yet when I went to shake hands with one of the teens, he held out his hand and then he went, and that's just the kind of thing I used to see at the Chenery, So and at one point there was this girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was like holding my hand. Like we were so welcomed in to people that had so little, you know? And any effort we made on their behalf, they just totally appreciated. Other questions? Yeah, Kathy.
I was curious if when you wrote me your biography, your father's name was Robert Waring Darwin. And when was the Darwin drop? That would have been that's quite a story.
Well, it was Charles's father's name.
Okay.
So
Charles,
Char-
I thought it was your father.
no, no, no. Charles Darwin had a father, Robert
Oh,
Waring Darwin. Hmm.
Darwin. Okay. And now it makes sense to me. I was confused as to whose father.
Yeah, yeah. An interesting story about Darwin is that he had a son who eventually was allowed to have a sleepover at a friend's house. So he goes over to the friend's house and gets a tour. And at the end, he says to the boy, so where's your father's study? And the kid's like, well, he doesn't have a study. And then his son said, well, where does he keep his barnacles? You know, Darwin was a specialist in barnacles. So he kind of assumed that everyone had their barnacle room. That was not the case. So that's how he learned how special his father was. Yeah, Deb.
Yeah, Richard, thank you first for this. The pictures were so evocative and the colors, it was very good photography. I came in a few minutes late and you may have already said, but who organized this trip and what was the itinerary?
It was through the Belmont Religious Council. They have every other year a trip, and one year they organized it, and then nobody but First Church youth wanted to go, and so they went to Panama. This particular one, Rayanne Mason organized, and it was the people who normally chaperone youth group trips, but we were youthless. Nevertheless, Rayanne found us to be a difficult group to keep in line.
Thank you. So, but could you say more about like the sort of how many days, just the nitty gritty of the tour itself? Were you were you always on a boat or you were in the village? I'm trying to put together.
We started out a week in the village, and then we were just so hot and sweaty and, worked very hard. They utilized us very well. Although we did have to wait out certain downpours that were absolutely torrential. Uh, you had to kind of base your plans on when the rain wasn't happening. And then we had another week extension to go explore the Galapagos because we were in the area.
I see.
Hmm.
Your
And
last slide was iguana IPA. What was
yeah,
the drink?
it was a beer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, India Pale Ale.
Do you know what it was made from?
We were not allowed to drink when we were in Shandia.
No,
But
what was it made with? I mean, beer of what plant?
well, it might have been produced elsewhere. It's just like when we're on Isabella Island, and there was a chocolate store that said, Charles Darwin's favorite chocolate. And you go in there and okay, but it's sort of, everything gets branded with Charles Darwin that may not have actually got the right pedigree. I did get a shirt that has Galapagos on it. And I was shopping with Stefan Frank, and they didn't have a shirt large enough for him. So when we left the store, he mutters under his breath, "Dwarf store." But later he was able to, through the internet, get a large enough size. So he's got one too.
So, Richard,
Yeah, Sally.
did you use your altitude pills? And I'm very interested to know because I couldn't tell from the map. Uh, is Ecuador right on the equator? Is it south of Peru and Chile? Or what is the order of those countries?
Yeah. Well, Ecuador means equator, and it is right on
Right.
the equator. In fact, we went to a place where the actual line is drawn. You could stand in one foot in the southern hemisphere, the other in the northern hemisphere. And they also had a table on which they had eggs, and you could have the eggs stand on one end because it was in such a balanced part of the world. So that was pretty cool.
So is Peru north of Ecuador, or is Ecuador north of Peru?
It's I don't know. I'm not so good at geography, but
Peru is further south.
The south, it's between Peru and Colombia, kind of wedged in there.
Thank you.
it is part of the Amazon rainforest. And in fact, we did learn that one of the tributaries of the Amazon that was in Ecuador, one of our guides had recently seen a fleet of pink dolphins, which sounded really awesome. But we didn't actually witness that ourselves, but we heard about it. Yeah, Kathy.
Another question just about how large were the iguanas that you saw? And also the other second question is about the age of that big tortoise that was in the museum, the taxidermy. How old was he when he died? So how big were the iguanas?
The iguanas were a good 6 feet long, and they have a tail that is almost half its length that if it gets attacked, that tail can break off and they can grow a new one. The new tail is not as long as the old one, but they have that ability to do that. I wish we could learn how to grow our arms the way, sea stars do. Yeah. I don't know the age of Lonesome George. David, do you remember?
I don't know, well over 100 years.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Pretty
They
good.
can really live a long
Thank
yet time. Yeah, Gene.
So Richard, what was the organization that ran? So there's is there an organization that works with a village, or what is
Yes.
the kind of the structure around bringing
Yeah.
people there?
It's a group called MANNA, MANNA, and we still get newsletters from them and help fundraise. In fact, we got close to one of the volunteers named Patrick, and they had organized to fly him to Shandia to work there for a year, but they didn't have any money to send him back to Malawi, his home country. So we actually did a little fundraising effort and got him safely back home. David, do you have anything more about Mana that you?
Yeah, it's called Mana International, and they started out in several countries, but now it seems to be the field office mostly in Shandia, Ecuador, with some remote people working on it. And it was quite an impressive operation in this community. They their office, if you will, was in that same lodging place where we were, which was part owned by Mana and part owned by the community. And they really integrated themselves into the community very well. And it was international. And the four main volunteers we work with were from various countries, including Spain and Malawi. And there was one other group. They would do this kind of trip while we were there. There was another group from a college in Ohio that was there volunteering, and another group passed through. So it was an impressive outfit. We also visited the local church there. We walked down from the lodge to the church, which was all in Spanish. But you could communicate with them, and the whole village was pretty impressive. As Richard said, the kids would come up and high five you, and it was just very friendly for, foreigners basically coming in. But MANA is still an organization, they fundraise, and still seem to be in pretty good shape.
I should mention that in addition to our vaccination precautions, we were also, when we were in Shandia, under tents. We had screens around our beds on all sides to protect us from any stray mosquitoes that would come into our room. But then,
Unfortunately, it didn't protect Richard from my snoring, though, I don't think.
but then, totally different climate on the Galapagos. There was absolutely no worry about getting mosquito bites there.
What is it? What is the healthcare like in the village for the people who live there?
It's a good question.
There,
It's
there was an incident, and there was remember the other volunteer from the college that had to get rushed to the hospital. There was a medical facility, very small in Shandia, and then it was close to another town called Tana that had hospital services. The quality of it, I really don't know, but when emergency came up, people were able to get it. And Shandia was pretty far out, into the rainforest. It was, like 4-hour drive from Quito into the jungle, basically.
Ooh. Thank you.
transportation among the villagers seemed to be minimal, and a lot of it had to do with bicycles or motorcycles, very few in the way of cars. And to get down off the mountain was a many-hour process. I actually forgot some antidepressant medication, and someone was able to bring some to me, which was actually, because we were in Ecuador, a fraction of the price that I would have in the US. So that was interesting. Did I see a hand?
Yeah, I was also, what's the political climate there in terms of safety? I think I recall that there was some questions of, whenever you go somewhere, what's that like? I'm just wondering, what are the villages or the surrounding areas dealing there in terms of, safety and other issues for them and for visitors?
Yeah, we were told that Quito would probably be the most problematic in that regard, but we were just passing through. And then in terms of drug trafficking, that seemed to be something that would happen more on the coast, and Quito is pretty far inland, so that didn't seem to be a concern. And then we pretty much jumped over any problem areas. Travels.
Yeah, there was a State Department publication, but it would identify areas that might be more dangerous, and they were all down on the coastal areas. And we did land and take off without getting out of the plane in Guayaquil, which is the coastal town. But I think as you got more in the inland, it was safer. It doesn't seem to be there. We did go at a rest stop, and there was soldiers with machine guns, but that was just security. We didn't have any problem. We were walking all over town. They did in Shandia in the lodge. They would have a gate that would close at night, but during the day you'd walk in and out. And it felt pretty comfortable, all in the rainforest areas. And certainly in the Galapagos, because that's tourist basically.
Well, thank you for going on this journey with me. It's been a pleasure to relive that wonderful experience, and really enjoyed sharing that with you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you,
for
Richard.
everything. This is wonderful. And I encourage everybody to stay tuned to when we go from the Galapagos to outer space and gamma rays in April.